So, we're talking about the Omen films. This is an interesting franchise, I feel like. It's weird even to pin it as a franchise, because it is 6 films now, because you got the original Omen from, 1976? The follow-up, which was like maybe 1978, and then the follow-up again, which was maybe 1981, I believe. Enough disconnect between the 3 films in the original trilogy, in contrast to, of course, the 4th film, The Awakening, and the the remake from 2006. They're definitely, those are the dates. 1991. It's strange how there's 10 years between the final conflict and Omen IV. I do have I've got to separate them all, don't I? I've got this Scream Factory set, which is probably the best way to watch them. It does have a 4K restoration of the first film, which is really good. I didn't dive into any of the special features, unfortunately. I haven't really gotten around to it yet. But, this does come with little stuff. You get a 4K restoration, you get a bunch of, interviews and audio commentaries. There's, 3 audio commentaries, plus an isolated score, an introduction by the director, theatrical trailers, and all that extra stuff. So that's pretty good, not a bad thing to have. The second film, Damien, the Omen II, has some new interviews, another audio commentary, and just some extra stuff. Definitely a step down in terms of quality for this series, but not the worst film in the series, far from it, realistically. The final conflict, actually I do believe the first film has the documentaries, but it's like the 666, the Omen Revealed and stuff like that, because the little pamphlet that comes with the Blu-ray does actually say that it comes with the Omen Legacy documentary and 666, the Omen Revealed documentary, as well as audio commentaries and vintage, interviews and stuff. You get the final conflict, which is also known as, the Omen 3, whatever. Again, new audio commentary, new interview. This one has the Omen Legacy documentary, and another audio commentary. My God, so many commentary tracks for these films. But the 4th film, where's the 4th film? There it is. 4th film I had to borrow from a friend in the end, because when I started watching the Blu-ray, it didn't work. It started working, and then it stopped, and it started, and whatever, and I think it has some scratches on the disc, but when I played it before filming this, I realized that it actually does play, and it has a documentary on it as well, which is the 666 The Omen Revealed documentary, which I think is a mistake in how they've written that, because I'm pretty sure it isn't. If I looked at Letterboxd, there was one. It has the Omen Legacy, but the Omen Revealed documentary is a different documentary, which wasn't on this disc, I'm pretty sure, because the Omen Revealed documentary has a different runtime. Like, this new one has an hour and a half, hour 40 runtime. It's longer than the goddamn movie itself. But, yeah. But I watched the DVD from a friend, and to be fair, in contrast, there's not a lot of difference between the Blu-ray and the DVD. And then, of course, there's the 2006 film, which does feature a audio commentary, Abbey Road Sessions featurette, Revelations 666 featurette, and unrated and extended scenes, which I did watch the unrated extended scenes and deleted scenes and extended ending, and ironically, it wouldn't play most of the ending. It kept jumping around, which was really funny to me. So, there's obviously some kind of problem with that disc as well, but the film ran fine, all the extended scenes were fine, but the ending itself was jittery, but I got the gist. They should have released an uncut version of it, I feel like, because the film is not very good, so I want to dive into all 3 of the... What the fuck? Hi. I don't know what just happened. Anyway, so yeah, as I was saying, I got the Omen box set from Scream Factory. I got it for like $40 on Amazon, which is pretty neat. Especially because I was looking at it when the fourth disc didn't work for the fourth film. This is the DVD I borrowed from a friend. And it was like, it was $170. I'm like, man, that's crazy. But of course, there is the element of, there's the four films. Four films? Hold on. 5. There are the original 5 films, of course, with, as I mentioned, the first Omen film, which I think I gave it 4.5 stars. You got Damien, the Omen 2. I do like the artwork that they have for these. There's no alternate artwork. The Final Conflict, I like how they just stick with the Final Conflict. They don't call it the Omen 3 or anything. Of course, Awakening and the 666. Or the 2006 version, as they call it. But of course, there was another Omen film, and that was the one that really was the convincing argument to watch all of these films. The First Omen. I'm going to start with the First Omen, because if we're going to talk in release order, we're going to talk about story order. We'll leave the worst till last anyway. I don't like the remake. I also have not logged my review for the fourth film yet, so I'm going to just kind of off the cuff give it a rating, if we're going to be honest. The First Omen is directed by Akasha Stevenson. Interesting name. This is the first film of hers that I've seen. It's a 2-hour film. These are all roughly 2 hours anyway, between an hour 10, an hour and... like an hour 50, 2 hour kind of thing. Except for the fourth film, which is 93 to 97 minutes, depending on technically which version you watch. The DVD I had was like 93 minutes, but the Blu-ray is 97. So I don't know if there's actually a difference. I don't really care. But the First Omen in its own right, brand new film, but it doesn't feel like it. It feels like it's a film from the 70s, which I really appreciate. They went really into the element of it actually looking and feeling like the original film, and that's pretty good. In its own right, you can definitely watch this film without having seen any of the previous films, but it does do a big plot retcon as to why Damien exists. Because more or less in the original film, it's just... there's this son of the devil, and like, whatever, like, here's how it was made, whatever. Like, they still give you the why it exists, but not, or more of the how it exists, but not the why. Was there a devious plot kind of deal? This film is like, there's a devious plot at hand. You expect it to be a film about the mother of the Omen, but then you're like, no, wait, sorry, the mother of the Antichrist. But then it's like, no, but the Antichrist is here, and she's a girl. She must be the mother. And like, there's a lot of different things that I didn't expect from this film. It's a slow burn horror in probably the best of ways. It does have various jump scares, but even those jump scares are not like your classic, like, The Nun, bam, jump scare, wow, you totally didn't expect that to happen, even though we all know that you did expect it. Instead, it plays on jump scare notions where it has like a weird thing happen, then it'll cut to a different image of a different scene, and like, I know one of them in particular is a woman eating like corn or something, and it cuts to her eating and it has a crunch, and it's like, haha, but it's like, I didn't think it was scary, I think it's funny. Like, I think that they're kind of playing with the audience, like, hey, you think you're going to get this because that's what modern horror does, but instead we're going to go with the 70s route of it being slow burn and creepy. One of the scariest scenes in the film is just the main character in a room seeing something in a dark corner, and you expect it to run out at her, and oh, scary, and I was expecting that, but instead it's just slowly draws out, just a person slowly coming out of the darkness, and looking creepy as hell, and it had a great effect to it, and I really like how they did it. I like the effects, I like how fucked up it went. Our screening had closed captions, which was really amusing, but it was allowed me to like kind of break out of not being too scared by the movie, because sometimes I like have a fear of being too scared by horror films, especially in the cinema. Didn't matter, still had an issue by the end of the film. But the film goes hard, like it doesn't like retract from anything. It's like, oh, here's a pregnancy scene that's unrelated to the main character. You just think, oh, they're not going to show anything vile or whatever. And then a hand comes out of a certain area that I did not expect that I would see on the bloody screen. And I'm like, oh shit, this movie's going for it. So I really appreciated that element to it. It has these elements that really just juices it up a little bit. It's just creepy. It's alluring. It does have homages to the first film, which I think is its biggest weakness. Mostly because some of them are like vague things, like like the priest who gets killed in the at the first film, another priest gets killed in a similar way in this one, but there's enough difference that it has like an artistic liberty, you know, like it still plays on the trope of coincidence, which I like. But then there's one that comes later on, which again is an iconic kill from the first film and even the remake, where it's a person who hangs himself, and in this one they are dripping wet. And minor spoiler, but not really, because it's just one of the deaths that happens. They are obviously covered in like gasoline and light themselves on fire. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. I wasn't expecting that, even though they were soaking wet. I'm thinking that's a bit weird. But then they still jump off a ledge, and they've still got a noose around their neck, and they still smash through a window. Like, it's still the same as the first film, but now they're just on fire. And I'm like, they could have just stuck with her being on fire, and she jumps and falls to her death. That would have been more impactful, I think, instead of being, oh, remember the first film? Like, I don't need that. Like artistic stuff where you expect that to happen and then something else happens, nice. But then being like, oh no, we're still going to follow through with the original version that you've seen. I'm like, why? I've seen this before. Don't do that. But then the last act of the film, it all goes fucking apeshit. And it is very different to what I expected. It was very grotesque. To a lot of degrees. I had a panic attack while watching it, which was wonderful. It's become a thing for me where I've noted in a couple of videos how modern cinema experience for me, I think mostly post-pandemic, I've had occasional panic attacks during movies. I'm not here to make a big like mental health argument or whatever. It's more or less just it's a thing I need to be concerned about and know how to handle. It's not anyone else's problem. It's not like I'm going to go around screaming or anything. I just starting to get I get really sweaty, I get really cramped, really nauseous. I feel like I'm going to throw up, I feel like I'm going to pass out. I've never fainted before, I've never passed out, I have no concerns of that happening. Like, I've never had that dramatic of a thing happen just in general, of like, oh, I've passed out. I've never had that. Hell, I didn't have a blood nose until I was 25, so what the hell are the odds? That was like a couple months ago. I'm probably dying, it's fine. But the point still remains is that, like, I wanted to not have this anxiety, especially during the movie. And I wasn't for a lot of it. I was enjoying it. I was really digging it. But the last 15 minutes, I was in full panic mode. It got to a point where it stopped and it ceased and I was fine. And then it wrapped up again. I'm just like, I somehow stuck through watching the rest of the film fucking dying. My friends who were with me had no idea until like the movie was over and most people had cleared the cinema and I was just like there breathing, just like, oh my god. I don't even think the film notoriously was shocking at all. It was just a visceral reaction I keep having sometimes during movies. But there can be elements, you know. My friend said it was probably a claustrophobic thing because I've had it during other scenes where it's been claustrophobic in different movies. But in this case, it was an emergency C-section without the emergency. And it was not what I really wanted to see, and I still saw it, and I was like, I don't know, maybe I just fear pregnancy? I'm not a woman, so I don't really need to worry about that. But, like, still, I don't know. It's not a thing I really want to try to diagnose. I should. Just general panic attack kind of things. Anyway, despite that, the film was fucking tremendous. It's probably one of my favorites I've watched so far this year. It's a real revelation to see that, like, horror cinema can still be so crazy. Like, I was meant to watch Immaculate the week before, but when we went to see it, me and my partner, the screening was, like, cancelled or something, so we just didn't get to see it. And I still haven't seen it. 4 days later, I'm seeing the First Omen, and then I find out, like, on Reddit that most people are like, yeah, these films are, like, kind of the same. And I wonder if that would have ruined my appetite, because the people I saw the First Omen with had seen all the original films, but did not watch Immaculate, so they don't know if there's a comparison for comparison's sake. So it's interesting to see that, like, both we're getting, like, artistic and really well done horror films that go hard into the fucked up stuff that I'm like, this is great. Why do I have to have a panic attack? But, like, at the same time, like, this is great, you know? Like, there's a show called Evil that's on, like, Paramount, which I fucking love. It's this kind of vibe, but more of, like, an X-Files-y thing. I dig it. And, like, it was just good, and the acting was fantastic. The lead actress is amazing. There's a lot of nice homages horror-wise to other films, notably Possession and Texas Chainsaw Massacre. There's like some Evil Dead kind of stuff. Like what's her name? And I know I credited her in my review. Nell Tiger Free, who plays Margaret. She is fantastic. It does have a good cast overall. It's a solid flick. I gave it 4.5 stars. I think as a first film, like if you want to go into it from the series from this first film, it doesn't ruin the second film. There's still things that, like, because there are homage elements to the actual first Omen film, the original Omen film. Annoying, isn't it, that this one's called the First Omen and then there's the Omen. People are getting confused. Which one's the first Omen? Which one's the Omen? Hey, they're both the same. But this one does end with enough of a tag of, oh, we're both immediately connecting this to the, next Omen film, which is the Richard Donner film. But also, potential sequel bait, which is really fucking amusing. Interested to see if they take that anywhere, because I imagine they will. But I mean, gotta have franchise IP, what can I say? But yeah, so I gave it 4.5 stars. I highly recommend it. I really, really loved it. Despite my in-cinema experience. But yeah, it was one of those amusing experiences of a horror film where, I had people eating chips next to me, people in the back row talking. Like, the things that would normally disrupt and annoy me during a movie didn't ruin the experience for me somehow. I used it more as a way to kind of escape from the movie's, like, more, visceral elements. But then once it happened in the last act, I was just like, haha, I've lost it. I'm done. I'm out. I'm dead. So, in the degree of I just gave up. I let it take me, and I was on board with everything that happened. It's just a good film. Again, despite the homage elements. But then, of course, we're going to jump into the previous films. We have The Omen from 1976, directed by Richard Donner. This is a film I gave 4 stars, so I do think The First Omen is better. Wow. But The First Omen's really an interesting film in general. It's definitely the strongest of any of the original bunch. And I don't really think there's much for me to personally say, but in terms of my reaction to it, because I know that when I came in here to watch it, whatever, I told Mum, and she was like, oh, I hope you'll be okay. I'm thinking, why? It's the fucking Omen. But for me, it's like my colleagues as well, people who were kids or teenagers when this film was out, who watched it either on VHS or when it came out in cinema, whatever, and have had their experiences with it, much like people with The Exorcist and whatever. And it was in that kind of phase of horror cinema, especially religious horror cinema, where things are mostly drama. Like, you look at, like, Don't Look Now, The Exorcist, The Omen, they're all dramas. It's about a family, it's about people dealing with grief and with problems and all this kind of stuff. But then there's all these, like, there's a lot of connecting dots. It's all family stuff and whatever. But then religion gets involved. Technically. Don't Look Now, not really, but it's that kind of thing of prophecy and fates and psychic stuff and metaphysics and all this kind of stuff. And it's interesting kind of seeing how people much older than me are reacting like, oh my god, are you okay? Was it the scariest experience of your life? I'm like, no. I didn't find the film to be like, oh my god, I'm so scared of woman hanging herself. Like, there are imagery in the film that is noteworthy, and there's stuff that I really like. I love Gregory Peck, the who plays the mother. She's an actress I don't think I've seen her in much before. Lee Remick. I've definitely heard the name before. Oh, she's in Anatomy of a Murder. I've seen that film. I don't think I've seen her in anything else that I know of. Looking at just the letterboxd, not really. There is a few films of hers that I have, like No Way to Treat a Lady and stuff like that, but yeah. Medusa Touch as well, so I haven't seen those ones yet, but it's got a solid cast, it's got solid directing. The kid who plays Damien's creepy, the dog is great, the nurse is great, like the nurse, the nanny, both nannies realistically, the photographer, like, it's a great cast. They really had everything going for it, despite, of course, you look at, like, the documentaries, the making of, and you find out, like, oh, there was all this bad luck that they had when they were filming, all this kind of stuff. I'm like, yeah, okay, I get that, whether you want to make it out to be some kind of religious hoo-ha, easy drama, people protesting the film when it came out, that kind of bullshit, like with The Exorcist. It's like, that is what it is. The context of the time, the context of the movie. Same with like Poltergeist had that. And that wasn't even a religious horror film. That was just tragic. So, yeah, I think as a culmination of things, as a horror film, no, I'm not going to describe what happens in these films, by the way. No plot spoilers. It has good elements to it. It's again a good slow burn drama. It's more people call it slow burn. It's just a drama. Like the horror elements come in very visceral scenes, and you've got this creepy air to it. A fantastic score by Jerry Goldsmith, which beautifully carries out through most of the franchise. Thank fuck, easily the best thing on the franchise. But it just has great elements and great scenery, and it ends on a great note. Like, it's a beautifully creepy film. And of course, it is that element too of like, if you're either during the time period or you're a highly religious person watching a religious horror film, which seems like a you heard of blasphemy before, but it feels like a film that if you have a connection to this kind of stuff, it can be more terrifying. Like, I didn't find The Exorcist terrifying for a while until I eventually just kind of had this like connection to the main character, to the mother, and I was just like, I feel her pain, I understand. Like, but it's also a film that could adapt over time. There's different fronts to the films in terms of its horror. Like, it could be that thing of they touch on the note of the Lee Remick's character does get pregnant later in the film, and that becomes like almost the inciting thing of she needs to die, you know, as per Damien's more or less decision. And so there is this element to the film, and even the fourth film, where it's kind of got this idea that adoption's bad. Like, it's almost like anti-Christian, anti-Catholic to be like, adoption's bad, even if they come from a fucking nunnery and an orphanage, or like literal religious figures are giving you a baby for free. I mean, there's enough, hey, maybe those religious figures are maybe Satanists. Oi. But, like, it's that kind of weird thing of, like, wow, maybe adoption's a bad thing? Like, obviously that's kind of a text in the film. The film isn't deliberately saying that. And the film as well, which I love, emphasizes that a lot of the things that happen, despite the fact that you can read this as, this is the son of the devil, yada, 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 every death is a coincidence. It just happens to happen. There's no one going out murdering people. All the deaths have some semblance of it just happens, like incidents, like accident. Again, the woman who hangs herself, it's her choice. She's sure you can argue that she's persuaded by the demons and whatever, and Damien, even though he doesn't even tell her to do anything, it's all these deaths, like the priest getting staked and shit like that, they're all just natural happenstance. There is a supernatural element to that, especially when you're watching it. It's like, yeah, there's enough argument visually and through like the film itself for textually, but also there is enough argument that it's all coincidence. And I really like that about the film. It plays it that, like, whether he is the son of the devil or not, even though the film pretty blatantly states it, and that's perfectly fine, or it's just a coincidence that there happens to be a jackal fucking bones in the mother's tomb. And who cares? Let's not think about it. It's this element that, like, it plays along with this idea throughout the whole series, that this is just incidental, that most of these deaths happen, you know? And I do like that about it. I think it gives it an extra touch, but even, I was watching an interview with Richard Donner where he said that, like, he was talking to the screenwriter about it, because he was like, which direction do we want to play it? Do we want to play it like, oh, maybe he is the son of the devil, maybe he isn't. But the screenwriter was like, no, he is, but we want to play it that he might not be. Which makes it more interesting, because especially when you get to the very final scene of the movie, well, the second last scene, I'd say, where a very pivotal thing happens. Again, I won't give plot details or spoilers, but, like, it has this element of, oh, maybe, but maybe that guy's the bad guy, but maybe the kid's the bad guy, you know? It's interesting. I'll briefly cover the second and third film, because they just carry on Damien's story. The second film is about him being in, like, military school, and it's interesting. I feel like it could have gone heavier into there's a cult of people protecting Damien and making sure he's raised to be the Antichrist, whatever. he comes to a realization that he is the Antichrist. There is a good element about that. It's still very melodramatic. There's a lot more kills in it. They aren't as significant as the first film. There's a lot of great kills in the first film that are not replicated well in the second one, but at the same time, the second one tries to be like, let's make more kills. Got to be more dead people. It's, oh wow, look at all these accidents that just keep fucking happening. I won't say it's the most memorable film, but it does have some interesting elements to it. It's a decent follow-up, but again, it loses the charm of Donner's direction, and it also does this thing where, like they did a lot of these films, where they push time, because it's like, okay, well, in the first film, it's like he's born in 71, this film takes place in 76 because he's, 5-6 years old, and then the second film, which is 78, he's like 15, and it's like, oh, but this still looks like the 70s, but it's meant to be like the mid-80s, and then the third one, 81, he's in his mid-30s, and it's like, this is meant to be the 2000s, and it looks like the goddamn early 80s. There are elements like that where I'm like, that's a fault of just how time has happened. Clearly they want to get these films out, and it's less of, let's focus on the production design to make it look like the future. They're not doing that, which is just bizarre, but maybe it's just this kind of Cold War kind of feat of things are kind of the same, but again, you look at costuming, the fourth film especially, which is released in 91, it has very late 80s, early 90s costuming, where some of the characters, especially the girl, Delia, has some very early 90s, really over-the-top clothes in terms of designs and patterns and stuff. And having just watched a bunch of 70s films where they're blaxploitation and they're very costume heavy, yeah, it's kind of a big deal. But the second film is pretty decent. I think I gave it 3 stars. I was not disappointed by it. Clearly it's not going to match the first film in both direction or even story, but it was not bad. I gave it 3 stars. The kid who plays Damien is pretty good. I still wish that because there's a lot of great extra characters, there's Lance Henriksen and whatever, there's a lot of great other characters, and I'm like, I really wish they just focused less on killing random people, because they can, and more of developing, what is meant to happen next, because of they're adding extra elements, like the Thorne family, that's Damien's, adopted parents, is they're in this industry that has to do with famine and agriculture and stuff, and it's I can understand where they're going on a biblical sense, and how, if Damien becomes in control of the company, then of course he will have control of literal famine, and I'm I feel it's a bit heavy-handed, but I'm also I feel they need to develop it more. If you want to have people who are deliberately looking after him to make sure that he succeeds the most, then do that. Make it more heavy-handed, but again, they're still kind of going on the whole, maybe he isn't the son of the devil, but then they emphasize it halfway through when he realizes that he is. When they go heavy-handed into it, again, becomes melodramatic for how he realizes, but I feel they could have gone harder into it. They could have gone more into building it. It could have felt more like the middle of a trilogy, even though this was meant to be a second film and not really a conclusion. But again, that's why it feels like the middle of a trilogy. It almost has that Star Wars-like effect where it feels that way. Oh, we'll have a second film. But of course, Empire hadn't come out by this stage. So they didn't even have that. It's just, we're making a second Omen film. Of course we are. We have enough reason to from the first film. It did well, whatever. But again, Richard Donner didn't return. He was doing Superman. And yeah, there's a lot of lackluster elements to it. But then the third film, which does have Sam Neill as Damien, and still takes the concept full flesh, where the whole promotion of it is oh, last time you saw him, he was a kid, but now the Antichrist is a man. He's grown up. His testicles have dropped. Oh, yeah. Anyway, so the third film is dull. I gave it 2.5 stars. I wasn't really enticed by it. I'm just this is a film that has too much going for it. There is so much that it kind of wants and needs to do, and it doesn't do fuck all. It's a lot of the stuff, like him having a cult leadership and stuff like that, is vaguely touched on. It's there and established. He's just a big businessman stuff, and it's the least interesting way to make this character fearful. He has a love interest, which is bizarre, but plays heavily into the plot. there were elements that I do like about the film, but I feel like it could have easily been done a lot better. And even Sam Neill at times I don't really care that much for. Like, he's a good, looks like Damien, that kind of stuff, but like, there are a lot of scenes where he doesn't feel like he has the presence that Damien needs. He doesn't feel scary enough to me. Did I say much about it? I said just the boring kind of boring. It has some interesting ideas, but most of it is just not interesting in execution. Sam Neill is decent as Damien, but he doesn't seem as frightening or showcasing of a strong, fearful presence as I expected he would. There's a baby killing montage in this film, which is kind of amusing. Yeah. I also say Damien choosing against missionary sex for something more demonic, probably anal. There's a lot of like kind of almost innuendo like jokes like that. While watching this, I was wondering if we could have done it differently in the style of Shin Godzilla. Yeah, I was thinking this film should have been like Shin Godzilla, where Damien is in board meetings the whole time, both as a high-powered executive guy or even the president, something that like trying to be president, like he's running a campaign, something that's like he's trying for that final step of power. But then, in contrast, this film is about how Jesus is being born again. It's the second coming of Christ. And in the meantime, like this could be taking place over years. Meantime, Jesus is born and he's raised, and then he has to fight the devil, or in this case, the Antichrist. And they do emphasize in the film that he knows that Jesus has been born. He feels his power slowly deteriorating, but there's no real visual element to that. Like, it's not like he like tries to like mind control a person, which he has done in previous films. And he could just look at a person and they'll just jump in front of a car. Like, there's no like element of him trying to do that and then it just failing. Like there's an immediacy, like, oh, once this baby is like 5, Damien will be bloody useless. Like, that's how they're kind of playing it. Like, once this baby is 6 months old, Damien won't even be able to get it up anymore. Like, there's just so many elements to it that I'm like, I see what they're going for, but they're just not doing it well enough, you know? So again, that Shin Godzilla thing of him being just so high in power and whatever, and if his power was like, he had the high of like, I'm the president, whatever, and then Jesus comes by and it's like, ka-chow, and just kills him. Like, turns out he actually had no power. He didn't realize that all of his actual evil powers had like diminished. He just happened to have a lot of influence. Again, this idea of what power actually is could have been a really good topic of discussion. Is someone born with power, or can they actually like, earn it kind of deal? And like, maybe, yeah, he earns the power to be like the president and everyone respects him. And then this one guy comes along and lo and behold, it's Jesus. And he's like, hey, all your actual power I now have, and I'm fully formed now, you're dead, It doesn't have to take place over 20 years. It could be like Jesus is born and becomes like a 20-year-old within like 5 minutes kind of deal. Like, it's they could have just gone hammy as shit, but they didn't. I haven't written my review, but I will talk about the fourth film, The Awakening. I like The Awakening. It's, again, it feels like a made-for-TV movie because it is. It was released theatrically in Australia, which is really amusing. I only just watched it before filming this because the Blu-ray didn't play the film properly, and maybe if I had to take it out, clean it, and put it back in, which I tried, didn't really do anything. But this time it did. It'll probably still screw up if I ever try to watch it again, but I don't know. The documentary seemed to work, so that was good enough. Like, I don't really know. But I watched the DVD copy either way. I enjoyed it. I'd probably give it 3 stars as well. It's pretty on par with the second film, where it has some interesting ideas. Again, it's kind of trying to be a remake of the first film, but also every time I feel like it's going to go in this direction and do a complete remake of the first film, it does a completely different thing. And I'm thinking, wow, this is crazy how it's just doing something completely different, but also something so similar. And the reason for it is what the twist is in like the last 10 minutes, which I won't say what it is, but it is hilarious what they go for. I was like, wait, how did they get to that? And I rewound it and watched the scene again. I'm like thinking, so she just puts 2 and 2 together, and she just asks the guy a question. There's no like montage of her figuring. Like, she looks at a book, realizes something, closes it, and then talks to a guy. There's no in between. It's just she's realized it. Now she's going to discuss it with this guy who's actually a bad guy, and lo and behold, there you go. But I think it ends really well. It's pretty decent for what it is. Like, it again feels like almost like a Lifetime movie, but with some blood, not as much in terms of the carnage that you'd expect. Like, I think it shows, obviously they probably had to limit what they could do, because like a guy gets decapitated, but they like cut away just in time. Like they do a slow motion of like a truck going through the top of a car, so just as he's getting decapitated, like it cuts to other people's reactions. It cuts to the girl, because it's now a girl, Delia, who's watching. And I like how they do it. They have like a bouncy ball that has like a clown face roll away. Get it? Because his head's been cut off. I like that kind of stuff. It's makes it more amusing, and again, you don't need to see someone's head fly around, which they do in the original film, but clearly they A, don't have the budget, and B, can't do it because it's a TV movie. So I like their workaround. But yeah, there were elements to it that I did enjoy. I was never really bored by it as well. They still have the original score from the first film, which is nice. The Jerry Goldsmith score actually has themes from the first and the third film, which is interesting. But yeah, it didn't feel like it was a sequel. It didn't really feel like it was in the same kind of world to a degree. Like, I'm like thinking, this is technically set in like the 2000s, and obviously it looks like 1990. And then they make an obvious, remember that? Yeah. And then I was like, okay, so this is definitely a sequel to the third film, which is fine. I think that kind of works better, because it's more in conjunction with the twist of the film. If you're not going to watch it, skip ahead a bit, but the twist is the fact that her father isn't her parents who they're investigating, and I really like the investigation plot and whatever, and this whole girl who's a nurse, a nun, who realizes she's like the Antichrist and is like, oh god, I'm going to leave this shit, and then she becomes a prostitute, and then she becomes a prophet. Really amusing stuff, but they make the connection that the Delia's actual birth parents, who don't actually exist, her dad is Damien. So, because he has sex in the previous film, this is his kid. He actually had a daughter and was put up for adoption. So obviously the cult realized what was going on, killed the woman who, despite Jesus literally coming back, this is probably the main issue, I think, is the fact that if you look at it in continuity with the previous film and Jesus has returned, how the hell could Delia exist? You know? Is it because they've just gone to some other Louisiana or whatever? They're not in New York anymore. It's Louisiana. Who cares? Like, whatever. Like, they've moved to a different state. Suddenly Jesus ain't going to follow them. Like, is Jesus still around? They don't answer those questions. When you think about that in the sense of, because this is a direct sequel, you're like, oh, where is any of the consequence from the previous film? It's not there at all. They're kind of going for a straight remake, but also they have to make a continuation. They really didn't need to. It was like they were forced to make it a continuation. Like, oh, Damien is the father, and obviously he's dead, and this cult have been working to make sure Delia is, raised in secret, and like all these people that the main characters, the parents are friends with, are part of this cult. And again, that's the kind of thing of like, that's been subtle and undercurrent and whatever is nice. I liked how they did that. And mother getting pregnant and still having the baby, you're like, wait a second, but in the first film, the mother gets pregnant and Delia kills the mother because, Damien kills the mother and whatever, because of whatever. But in this one, they're not doing that. And then, of course, the twist being that Delia was at a menstruative age, at the age of 8, was able to carry an egg. They used that egg, put it in the mother. That became the son, and then bam, now you've got a pair of antichrists. So it became 2 of them. It's not like there was some kind of element of the prophecy that both could survive and become stronger because of that, even though Jesus has been around for like 10 or so years now. So, yeah, because they never did any more of these films, it's kind of a bit of a shrug. So again, maybe the 2.5, 3-star rating, when you really think of it in the continuity, it's bad. But as a film, it's okay, so it's kind of mid. I'd probably give it 2.5 stars with just an extra like. Because I'm like, again, I enjoyed it more than the third film, but yeah. But also, because I was fearing that it was going to be a direct remake, I was like, oh, that's not good. And also because I'd heard bad things, I was going in with like the lowest expectations. But then we jump into the OMEN 666, aka 2006, because I watched that before watching the OMEN 4. Because again, my disc was scratched, so I was like, oh, I can't watch the 4th film, I guess I just won't ever watch it, whatever. My friends had it, thank God. The Omen 666 is a bad movie. I gave it like a star and a half. It's just not good. Like, it is just doing a complete remake of the original one, almost like shot for shot, without any of the heart or the soul or the passion of filmmaking. It's just shit. Even watching the extended scenes where you get to see a bit more gore, which I'm like, oh, that's not bad, I guess. And even seeing the extended ending, I'm just like, none of it adds to it. They could have easily made an uncut version of this film, and it would have been like, oh, well, I mean, the blood effects were nice, and that would have been it. But they don't do that because they leave it as a theatrical version. It's not good. Lee Shriver fucking replaces Gregory Peck. Bad choice. He doesn't have like any character. He just seems like a blank slate. Everyone feels like a blank slate. Even Julia Stiles, who's trying, again, feels like a blank slate. She's the mother, and she just doesn't have that edge to it. The kid who plays Damien is... I mean, I feel like that kid got bullied in school after this movie came out. I feel so sorry for him. I feel like this is like an Anakin situation of, oh, he has to look bad and unattractive, so let's give him a bald haircut and make him pale as shit. Yeah, it is just a remake, but set in like 2006, and it's just not good. So much of it is just the exact same as the original without any difference. I was talking to Caitlin about it afterwards because because her and Phil, who lent me the DVD, they've seen obviously all the films, and Caitlin was saying how she saw it when it came out in cinemas, and it was the first Omen film she ever saw. So of course she sees the bad one first, and obviously she's like, man, this fucking sucks. But then she saw the original, she's like, oh, I get it now. The original's so much better because you contrasted to that. And I think because I was contrasting the fact that the 2006 film was a direct remake of the original film, no differences, really. There's like one extra scene, which is like Lee Shriver talks to a fucking psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist is like, maybe your son's not the Antichrist, don't worry about it, it's fine. And then they just don't talk about it again. He doesn't appear in the rest of the film, this goddamn psychiatrist. It's so stupid. But it has this element where it's like, because I watched this remake before I watched the full film, I'm like, man, the full film really has a step up, because at least it's doing something different because of its twist being that it's a continuation. Yeah. I want to note that I did watch the Omen Revealed documentary, which was on the Scream Factory disc for the Omen IV. And I think it was really good. It was like an hour 40. It delved into the whole, like all four films, the original four films, and making ofs. It dived into the history of how the films got developed and what they became. It dived into special effects and casting and all these really good elements. And I do think that as a behind-the-scenes featurette, as a whole documentary making of, it is very good. As well as the interview that was also featured on the Omen IV, talking about the writer of the film. And it was nice to kind of get an idea as to the making of, so obviously, for reference sake, get the Scream Factory set, because they dive beautifully into these films, but I definitely would not recommend the 666 film, the Omen remake. Just avoid it at all costs, and just watch the other films. Even the fourth one. I still think the fourth one is pretty decent. But I mean, if you want to go to objective, kind of like, oh, well, you know, the fifth film can't be that bad compared to the fourth film, and it's just worse. So, yeah. Anyway, I would definitely recommend the documentary. It's very good. The Omen films are an interesting series. Yeah, I'm not talking much about the goddamn remake. I would not recommend it to anyone. It was a waste of 2 hours of my life. I think it was a waste of most people's lives, to be honest. The Omen series is interesting. Given that realistically there are two solid, really good films with the first Omen and the original Omen. See what I did there? So it's one of those things where I'm like, I'm interested to see if they really do try to continue this series and where they take it. Do they want to retcon Damien, the Omen 2, and the third film? I don't know. It's one of those areas where it's like they could do it because they clearly have an image of Gregory Peck at the end of the first Omen, so they're like, okay, well, clearly this is a prequel to the first one. That was obvious as it is. I think everyone got that from the get-go. But the fact that they go hard into it, it's like, what if they leave the original Omen as canon, and then because they're still going for this, like, direct to replicating the time period thing, what if they just go straight to a second film? It's like this. The next Omen film is a direct sequel to to the Omen, the 76 version, but it retcons out Damien, the Omen 2, and the Final Conflict, and the Omen 4. What if they did that? Like, that would be really interesting to see if they did that, especially if they were like, what if we did it and it was like set 30 years later, set in present day, and Damien has grown up, and you've seen how that last scene has entangled with the rest of, the next 30 years, instead of it being such a dramatic thing. Maybe, again, you can even still be like, oh, people still like Damien too. What if we leave that one in canon, and then cut to fuck the Final Conflict because we want to keep Damien alive and be a 30-year-old, but he's a 30-year-old in, like, the 2000s, the 2010s, or even set at present day in the 2020s. Maybe he's the reason for the COVID pandemic. Like, some bullshit like that. Like, they could do that. I don't think they will. I think they want to kind of be like, no, we'll leave that be as it is. Maybe we'll do something else. I don't think that they will, but they easily could, given legacy sequels like Halloween has, like, retconned out previous films beforehand and stuff like that. They could easily do it. I don't know if they will, but they could. Maybe they should. Who knows? If in a good filmmaker's hand, this could become a decent trilogy of the first Omen, the Omen, and then whatever the third film is. Or if you still watch Damien the Omen 2, then do a fourth film. But they will probably do a continuation to the first Omen, which could be interesting. It could just be a waste of potential. We'll see. But again, the original Omen film is great. Can't go wrong. Damien the Omen 2 is pretty interesting. Again, it doesn't feel like it uses its full potential. It's too much feels like almost setups instead of payoffs. And then, of course, the Final Conflict is just a bad payoff. Again, I wouldn't not suggest these films. They're really interesting for what they are. Again, it's not a lot of... There's a lot of death in it, that's for sure. Especially in Damien the Omen 2. The third film, The Final Conflict, doesn't have as much murder, but it does have babies getting killed, which is a very weird visual. It's not like The Flash, but it's much more dramatic. And not as poorly done. It's not as fucked up as you probably imagine you'd see. But then, of course, you do have the Omen IV, The Awakening, which I don't think is a bad film on its own merits. As a continuation of the Final Conflict, it's not great, because of what's set up in the Final Conflict, or even what is paid off in the Final Conflict. But as its own thing, almost completely as a reboot, pretty good. Like, not the best, just pretty decent general stuff. Then, of course, the remake from 2006 is just a bad film. So, it's an interesting series as an overall. I would recommend them, especially the Scream Factory set, despite the issues I've had with at least 2 of the discs. But, yeah. And I think it's probably worth looking into the supplementary material with the documentaries. The interview I saw of Richard Donner was really interesting, seeing how it was like his shot of a lifetime. As he was like, if not for this movie, I would not have made Superman, I would not have met my wife. All these different elements that, like, this movie made his life happen the way it did. So, yeah. But yeah, interesting series. Check it out for yourself, and I'll see you guys next time. If you've seen the Omen films, what are your favorites? Do you have a favorite? Do you really give that much of a shit about the Omen? My view count being 30 for this video will really emphasize how no one cares. Anyway, thanks for watching. See you next time.